So it's projection season, or it's a time at which a lot of us are trying to put together projections with expectations of what's going to happen in 2023. And my process really starts off with trying to understand who's been doing what in terms of positions and fantasy football finishes over the last 3 years compared to the last 10 years, to look at who's more likely to break out, who's more likely to return, and who's more likely to repeat. We can target specific players based on positional trends of who's more likely to do something that other people might not be expecting when we compare it to ADP. So this is a boring part of this week's videos where I break down the process, or at least explain what the words mean before I go into the positions more specifically to talk about who's standing out based on that. So the first thing we need to get a handle on is what do the terms mean. So what you see here is a list of the top 12 wide receivers in total points scored in PPR formats in 2022. You see that Justin Jefferson finished as a wide receiver 1 in overall points scored in 2022. That was a repeat in the top 36 for him, and the top 24 and the top 12. Justin Jefferson has finished in the top 36, the top 24 and the top 12 consistently for the last few years. So he's repeating across all those different definitions. On the other hand, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who had broken out at a top 24 level the year before, finally broke out to a top 12 level in 2022. So you see next to his name, Amon-Ra St. Brown, in the top 12 column says breakout. So by breakout, I mean the first time a player finishes. The first time a player finishes inside that positional rank in overall points. Not points per game, although I still have that argument fairly regularly, to be honest. A repeat is someone who was in that same positional group the year before. So breakouts are a player who's finishing inside that positional rank for the first time in their career. A repeat is someone who's been inside the top 12 the year before and was once again inside the top 12 or the top 24 or the top 36 the year after. Now, a returning player is someone who has finished inside that positional grouping before, inside the top 12, top 24 or top 36, but didn't the previous year. So last year, AJ Brown returned into the top 24 and the top 12 in 2022. So those are the three terms. Breakout, the first time a player actually finishes inside that positional rank. A return, a player who's done it before but didn't do it the year before that. And a player who's repeating because he was in that positional grouping last year and he's in that positional grouping the next year as well. Now, that's by no means the only or the best definition necessarily of what those terms mean, but by creating a definition with data, I can actually go back and look at how well those perform year over year, how many repeat, how many return, and how many break out. Now, the important thing to note about these averages is that, well, for one, wide receiver and running back look remarkably similar, but don't be fooled. These aren't consistent percentages. The percentages of players who finish inside the top 12 or the top 24 in 1 year isn't necessarily reflective of what's going to happen in the following year. Now, while we do like to run to the average to create some sort of expectation, always remember that the average is a fallacy. The one number that you know is not ultimately true is the average. However, the reason I like to look at it is because there are regressive trends. If a position consistently doesn't show a lot of breakouts over a period of 3 years or 2 years or even 1 year, you can have a higher expectation of seeing more, at least closer to the average of that type of player in the following season. This makes sense just thinking about the NFL. Players come into the league in a wave of talent from one particular rookie draft class. And so you see a surge of breakouts, and then you see a surge of repeats, and then you see a surge of returns after injuries happen. It's not always that linear, but there are reasons to expect that this data or these trends would have a pattern to them. The other thing to note, where I'm mostly going to be breaking down or giving you the averages of the top 12, is that large percentage differences can only represent, or can often only represent, 1 or 2 players. Like 10% of 12 players is less than a whole player, or at least 8%. 8% of 12 players would be 1 player, right? Yeah. So, if the difference from 1 year to the next is within 10%, or even within 15 or 20, it doesn't necessarily make a remarkable difference inside the top 12. But I get really interested when you can see a consistent, over a period of years, lack of repeats, breakouts, or returns, because it really does seem like the NFL is gearing up or due to use a very loaded term, that type of player to occur in the following season, or at least the following few seasons, in order to return us to the average. So again, remembering that the percentages represent whole players, or often the differences between those percentages don't represent even whole players, what we're looking for is to establish the average that we know isn't true, but can give us a decent expectation of what to see in an individual season. So inside the top 12, since 2008, about 45% of quarterbacks to finish inside the top 12 were repeating inside the top 12. So nearly 6 players every year finished in the top 12 the year before at the quarterback position. At running back, it's around 39%, and wide receiver, it's around 38% inside the top 12. That's in the percentage of players that repeat. At tight end, it's a little higher, 47%. But remember, the top 12 category at tight end is sus. It's suspect. Top 12 players don't necessarily matter. That's why I maintain a top 5 category, specifically to look at the tight end position, because that's where you get the majority or any tight end that makes significant difference. Although the tight end position is going to be really important this year for looking at these trends, I can already give you a preview. And so we're going to start with the top 12, because top 12 breakouts are still going to have remarkable value changes, and so we want to pay attention to those in Dynasty as well. Inside the top 24 and top 36, you see similar trends. Running back and wide receiver repeat around about 50% inside the top 24. Running back actually has a slight edge since 2008 over wide receiver, although we do know that ranks change much more rapidly at running back than wide receiver, and so the value changes don't necessarily reflect this repeat rate, and it's why you can find something of an edge in top 24 running backs, because while they don't matter for positional differences, because they don't compete for wide receivers as flex spots, lots of them are underdrafted in fantasy because people are more interested in their shiny and new things, while those deeper running backs that finish inside the top 24 are less sexy because they don't have that top 12 potential, so they fall down ranks. But they do repeat at a fairly significant rate. Wide receivers, and again this number does vary over year, repeat essentially at the same rate inside the top 24, but again, the ranks and the value changes are an entirely different story. How many players return? In the top 12, quarterbacks return to the top 12 after taking a year off about 15% of the time since 2008. 18% of the time at running back, 18% of the time at wide receiver, with again, running back getting a slightly larger edge, and tight end 17%. So you can see that the percentages at the return rate are lower than breakout rate, and they're definitely lower than the repeat rate as well. Very few players, or a relatively small percentage of players finishing inside the top 12 and the top 24 and top 36 fell out of the top 12, top 24, top 36 the year before. It happens, and positional and player context is really important when looking at returns. Some players get injured, some players fall out of the top 12 because they are at the end of their career, or they retire, or they go through legal troubles, and those shouldn't, and those are just some of the reasons we should expect the return rate to be relatively low. Breakout players, the only one of these that anyone ever really asks about, probably because it's the most value-inducing and most exciting to play in fantasy football, although I would recommend checking out the other two, or thinking about the other two a little bit, because they are just as important for fantasy in terms of scoring points at least. And again, the return rate can have significant value swings. Breakout rate. Inside the top 12, about 21% of quarterbacks break out every year or in a random year. 21% of the top 12 quarterbacks are finishing inside the top 12 for the first time. At running back, 39% of the top 12 players are finishing inside the top 12 for the first time. 37% for wide receiver. So you see that the slightly lower number for wide receiver there is a positive thing for wide receiver, in that the consistency of the position actually measures up inside the top 12. At tight end, 32% of the players finishing inside the top 12 on a random year random X, on average, tend to be breakouts inside the top 12 in any given season. Inside the top 24, you actually see that breakouts are actually much more common, and running back and wide receiver are in a random year. 34% at running back, you see more breakouts at running back inside the top 24 on a year-by-year basis than you do wide receiver, which is the second highest breakout rate, with 30% of the top 24 players being breakouts, finishing inside the top 24 for the first time. Tight end is the next, 24% of the top 24, but we don't care about them very much outside of that point per game exception, 16% at quarterback. All of this, or my main takeaway from this broad scale look, because we also are going to dig into these on how many players break out with draft capital and without draft capital, because that matters a lot in terms of expectation in any given random season, and how many break out young versus old. We can combine those two variables in terms of career year and draft round to see more in-depth expectation for what's going to happen in an individual season. We'll deal with that when we get to the positional breakouts. But my main takeaway from this broad view is that the majority of players finishing inside the top 12, top 24, and top 36 are actually vets or proven. If you combine the repeat rate with the return rate, then what you see is 60% of most positional groupings are actually players who have finished inside the top 12 before. If we update for more recent data, say the last 10 years since 2012, what you see is that repeat or veteran rate has actually increased. From 2014 to now, we've actually seen a lot of incoming talent and a drastic change at the way the NFL is producing, and so I actually think these vet and proven rates are actually more consistent when you're looking at who's going to finish inside the top 12. So as you can probably guess, there's a lot more to trying to apply this directly to create expectations for 2023. Again, like I mentioned, I want to look at draft round, I want to look at career year. There are some trends in terms of how often players are breaking out inside the first 3 career years and outside the first 3 career years, and they're actually relatively interesting if you adjust that for being drafted inside the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft and outside the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Why? Well, it makes sense when you think about it. Wide receivers or running backs with less draft capital have less easy path to opportunity early in their career. So those waves of talent that come from different areas in the NFL in terms of those simple definitions of what players are early in their career, late in their career, high drafted or low drafted, should pattern fairly differently. Players further into their career year who break out or repeat or return are more likely to have lower draft capital when they do it for the first time at least, and it's the same with repeats and returns as well. We should expect different career arcs for players with different known identifiable aspects that affect their level of opportunity on a year-by-year basis, so we have to look at that. But more importantly, we have to remember that this average is a fallacy. Specifically, it's to give us some level of expectation. 40% of returns in the top 12 for wide receiver and running back is a pretty decent expectation. That gives you a lot of opportunity to speculate on who the other 6 or 7 players are going to be on a year-by-year basis. But heading into 2023, we should have different expectations because it's not random season X, it's 2023. And what we know last year is that 33% of wide receivers broke out. The average is around 37%. But over the last 3 years, we've had a consistently high breakout rate as this new wave of emerging talent has come in since 2020, 2021, and now 2022. We're running above the average over the last 3 years. We've probably seen, while we'll still get a few young breakouts, we've probably seen an excessive number of good young breakouts in that these 3 classes have come in and taken a lot of the jobs, and because they're good, they're going to start becoming repeats, creating a higher repeat level instead of a higher breakout level over the next few years. Running back, on the other hand, in the last 2 years has broken out at an abysmally low rate. We've seen high returns, we've seen high repeat rates at that position. While the average is around 39% repeat or breakout inside the top 12 for the first time, at running back only 25% of the top 12 running backs each of the last seasons have been breakouts. Most have been returns or repeats when we find value. Now we've known this and we knew this in 2022 as well. Moving forward, we should expect to see more breakouts, not more returns, not more repeats. Will that happen exactly in 2023? I think so. It's worth noting that the only other 2-period year I see with a below average breakout rate for running backs is 2011 and 2012. Since then, there have never been 2 back-to-back years with a below that 39% average breakout rate. Alright, so that's the too long didn't read overview of the broad trends. Again, I want to dig into the individual positions in short videos where I detail the career year and draft round trends and hopefully create some expectation of what's going to happen in 2023 that goes together with my projections to hopefully give us a good guide of, where to find edges in our Dynasty leagues. Let me know what you think. You can find all that data in my NFL database, in the link tree, on Patreon, which links to a Google Sheet, which has that table. Thanks again for checking out the video, and I will see you in the next one.